Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I think we are probably ready to get going, given that that is now 2 o'clock. So I hope you've had a bit of an opportunity as you've come into the virtual space this afternoon just to read some of the instructions really on the first slide there that you can see, and just a reminder of some key points, which is that the session is being recorded this afternoon, much to my horror, but nevertheless it is. So please don't make any separate recordings for your own use or your own sake, as this will be available for you. If we could just ask please that you leave your microphones muted. That will just help everyone to hear the content of the session as well as we can possibly manage this afternoon. That's greatly appreciated. And there will be, we hope, an opportunity near the end of the session for people to switch on their cameras and microphones if there's questions or discussion points that we want to pick up upon. Okay, so first things first then, it is lovely to meet you. It's lovely to see you. If we can see you, please do feel free to put your name and where you're working into the chat function. That just helps us to feel that we're connected to you and that we're not speaking to just a big blank space. So please do feel free to introduce yourself. That would be really helpful. My name's Lisa McCabe. I'm Education Service Manager in Falkirk. And I'm absolutely delighted to be with you all this afternoon to talk about my very favourite subject, which is play pedagogy in the early stages of primary and in nursery. And I'm delighted to be joined by a colleague of mine here in Falkirk. So Laura, if you could switch on your camera and microphone and just introduce yourself.
Hi there, I'm Laura Jarvie. I'm the head teacher at Cairnshore Primary School in Falkirk.
Great, thanks Laura. So Laura and I are doing a bit of a double act this afternoon. We have 45 minutes. I'm going to face up just now and say to you that we are very challenged, both of us, in trying to keep our comments and our thoughts about this topic about which we're passionate about to 45 minutes, and given that we've to share that time, it is a real challenge for us, but we will do our level best. So I'm going to kick off and thoughts and reflections, and then we'll hand over to Laura and she will take you through another 20 minutes or so from her context and her perspective. So a bit of a reminder then about what we are aiming to do in the session this afternoon. Our topic and our title that we've given to the session is this. So a wee bit of a play on words, but really, I suppose, an opportunity through this experience that we have and this opportunity provided by the Scottish Learning Festival to really grapple, I suppose, with some big ideas around our schools and our nurseries, and this topic of play pedagogy has been one that has been debated in and around our system for a wee while, and we are delighted about that. Those of us that are passionate about it are delighted that we are able to have these opportunities to talk with colleagues about how we can really embrace that opportunity that is before us. But really, I suppose what we wanted to do in this session was to ask ourselves some difficult questions and really reflect upon, you know, how serious are we as a nation about getting this right for our young children? Do we really or have we really embraced all of the levers that are available to us as leaders and practitioners to really embed play pedagogy in the way that we really think it should be? Or are we just kind of kidding on? Are we just playing at it? And who's responsible for that, whatever side of the fence you might be on in that debate? So that was the title that we had gone for. The title that we considered going for was this one: which is the toxicity of collusion. So it has a bit more of a negative connotation in some ways. So we didn't quite want to put that out there, and thought we might not attract as many people to the session. But really, this is what we want to talk about. We want to talk about that idea of conflict, the conflict in the system, and to what extent maybe are we as leaders, and be that local authority leaders, be it school leaders, be it practitioners in classrooms and in playrooms, to what extent really maybe at times are we colluding with some of the conflict that is there in the system that's maybe just not getting us fully to where we need to be. So our purpose this afternoon is to throw open some of those questions to you to reflect upon, and to maybe just go away, perhaps just to think maybe a bit more so about what's in our own hands really, in order to get us to where we want to be, if indeed we want to be fully down that road of play pedagogy. So in order to set that context then, we do need to consider, I guess, the white elephant in the room. And for that, we need to think about the national context, because in my mind, that is where the biggest conflict lies at the moment. So in some sense, we do have intention through policy of enabling our practitioners and all of us as leaders to really take forward this play approach, because we believe it's right for children. It is rooted in developmental psychology, as we know, the way that young children best learn. And all of the permissions seem to be there in policy, you know, not least of which we have the wonderful realising the ambition, which is lauded, you know, in our own country and lauded internationally. And we're deeply proud of the fact that we have that in our system. So all of the intention that realising the ambition brings, and indeed Curriculum for Excellence in the early level before it brought, was that notion of learning being holistic, and more so that being an imperative for young children and young learners. That idea of personalisation, you know, given children's developmental stage as wee children, who in some cases have been on the planet when they come into our system for 3 years, you know, and all that they have developed socially and emotionally at that point and continue to develop through their early stages of primary. Personalisation to them, highly relevant experiences to them is very, very important. Those seamless methodologies, the early level aimed to create that. It aimed to not have that separateness between early years or nursery and then primary school. So we had that intention about the early level. That was its purpose. We obviously want developmentally appropriate experiences, because why would we not want that? We want that at every, you know, stage of education. But that kind of sharpness and that need for young children is really more exposed, and requires us, I think, to think more critically about that, and what does that mean. We want to see the early level as that unique stage. You know, it's not to be the same as everywhere else. It's worthy of that separate consideration in order that we're able to deliver what's right for children as they learn and develop and become familiar with the world that they're in, and able to navigate that and take ownership of all of that. And then, of course, what we want is capacities for learning. We want these to be the outcomes of our learning across the early level. And we want to think about how we enable children to develop behaviours for learning and attitudes for learning that really will stick and will provide the constructs for them that will open up and enable them to go through the rest of their schooling and be successful. However, in reality, we have standardised assessments, we have SNSAs that are in place for children at the end of primary one. We have 8 subject areas, and our practitioners are expected to plan and evidence those subject areas in that kind of disaggregated way in some ways if we're not careful. We have how good is our school for nursery, and it is in the form of how good is our ELC. We have a workforce that is, I suppose, constructed differently across the early level, and that does pose interesting questions and interesting challenges. So the seamlessness of those methodologies that we intend and we want, the reality of that in a practical sense has some obvious questions about it. And we do have, unfortunately, that notion of still schoolification and school readiness that does creep into conversations, partly, I think, because we have these other elements in our system through standardised tests and subject areas that in some ways reinforce some of that way of thinking. So the intention that we have through all of these wonderful permissions of policy and of guidance is undermined in some way by the reality of some of these other elements that we have to face and we have to deal with. So interestingly, this was discussed and has been discussed and is being discussed over time. And when we introduce that notion of play pedagogy, there are very obvious challenges with that, and I came across this very helpful document here, which kind of sets that out maybe a bit differently. I think it was Education Scotland colleagues that shared some of these considerations, and really, I suppose through some of what's been said here, and I won't go through them all, but clearly in the context of play and play pedagogy, but clearly evidencing some of that conflict that is there in the system. And, in some ways, when our cups half full, we can reflect and say it's good that we have our national partners able to talk about the conflict that's there and able to challenge and see how it is that this is being felt by us as leaders and practitioners. But you can see there the very obvious conflict and challenges that we every day are having to grapple with. And what I think that represents is an unacceptable challenge to our frontline staff, and many of you on this call will be exactly in that position. I, as a local authority leader, it's my job. It's my job to safeguard and protect the people that we rely upon so heavily to make learning as effective and as impactful as it possibly can be for our learners in our playrooms and classrooms. And we are challenged as local authority officers also in doing that, because we don't want to be irresponsible and not help our schools and our practitioners feel that they can live up to some of those expectations that we have through the inspectorate and through the other elements that we're having to evidence. But at the same time, that conflict of knowing that some of that really is a distraction from what we really want to do in terms of in that interface between the teacher, educator and the child. And I think that my main concern about all of this is that it is becoming unacceptable. It's becoming really hard to keep safeguarding that and keep that level of protection. And where we have practitioners who feel that conflict, then we almost run the risk of generating one of two types of profession. We either have a profession that it feels really confident, it feels empowered, it feels that it has the support of the leadership at all levels, including, you know, the wider systems leadership, and that we trust our practitioners to deliver the right kind of experience for children, knowing that they are seeing the outcome and the impact of that in their classrooms. Or we have a confused workforce. We have a workforce that's trying to please all of these masters. It's receiving the messages of intention that's coming through all of the guidance and the support that we know and that we like and we really accept as being true, while also these other elements that we're having to make sure are also there within the system. And if we have the latter in our workforce, that is a disabling influence. And what system, what self-respecting system would have that as its intention and that as its outcome? We need a workforce that doesn't fear, that knows its role, that knows that what it is doing is right by intention. It's not to say that we don't continue to learn. Of course we do, and there has been so much for early years practitioners and staff working in the early stages around play pedagogy. But the frustration that can arise when you're receiving all of that to then not be fully able to execute it in the way that we want is a very toxic, it's a very, very toxic potentially influence. And I think we all have a responsibility to make sure that we know that and we know the unintended consequence of that, and where possible we try to safeguard that being an outcome that we are presiding over in essence. So it is sometimes, with all of that, easy to blame. It's easy to say, well, the reason that we are practicing in this way is because, you know, we've to do SNSAs, or we've to make sure that we are delivering the curriculum in the way that it's constructed at the minute, and, you know, and that's causing us to do these things. So what we want to, what I want to do in the short time I've got available now is to just invite us all to think about, okay, where though might we be colluding with that? Where might we be just putting ourselves into a position of knowing what's best, that intentionality of what we know and what we set out to do, but in practice and in some of the ways that we practice, we're actually colluding, we're actually making that feel that it's okay, because the impact of that collusion is a confused pedagogy. It is about that that wee bunny rabbit that's got the quite, don't know where I quite am, don't know what my intention is here, I don't know really what's right, and therefore you get a very superficial approach to what it is that we're trying to do, and that will not be transformational in the way that we need it. So just some examples perhaps of where we can find collusion happening. So we can go into some of our nursery establishments, or indeed our primary one classes, and we can be hearing from the leadership and from practitioners that yes, we want here, and we have adopted a play pedagogy approach, we've engaged in all of this professional learning, but then some of the practices, some of those traditions that have existed maybe in primary schools start to creep in and start to become features of what we perhaps would think would sit quite as well within a play pedagogy type of approach. And I've given some examples here. I'll not go through all of them, but these are really for you to reflect upon. What I'd like to do though is I'd like to offer 5 reflective questions for you in whichever role you might be in, whether it be a local authority leader, school leader, or a practitioner, to just take away and reflect yourself about, you know, am I colluding a wee bit with this? Am I not really using all of the levers and all of the influence that I have to maybe stand against some of what is invariably there, and might be there for a wee while, and we'll keep making the case to the policymakers. But, you know, what are the things that I can do right now that may not have me in that position of having to make those decisions, that I'm not colluding, and therefore I'm standing against that potential to have that confused pedagogy. So 5 questions. The first being this one, across your early level, has enough work been done to consider the shared image of the child, or has all of the dialogue really been around right to the practice? You know, has it been around the environment, which is absolutely important, and of course we need to think about that. Has it been around the planning? Has it been around observation? But really maybe not enough done to consider, actually, what do we want for children? What is that image of the young child that we have? Do we still think a wee bit about a nursery child and a school child? And therefore, in so doing, what we're doing is that schoolification. Children are coming into primary 1, they're coming into school, and really those traditions of primary school are still needing to be features of primary 1. Have we really deeply reflected on that within our own context? And crucially, if we have done, have we created visibilities for our community around some of those discussions and some of those considerations? Question 2, do you ask as peers, do you ask as leaders, do we ask as local authority people, do we ask enabling enough questions about learning and teaching, particularly in primary 1? So rather than think about what are the numeracy activities that you are planning, to be thinking about where is the numeracy here in your planning? Where has the child shown numeracy behaviours in their play? That notion of continuous provision, with the good faith that that has been planned and thought through to create that seamlessness from nursery, and that in and of itself will be supportive of children's deep learning. So some questions constrain and place a ceiling on what we can observe about children, and other questions, when we think more holistically, open that up. And we just need to be a bit more consistent in how we use that language and how we use those questions. Third question, if it didn't happen in nursery, why is it happening in primary 1? Or if your brain works the other way, if it's happening in nursery, why does it not happen in primary 1? So that notion of seamlessness, why the change? Why does the change need to be there? Is that because of what's expected from whomever? Is that because of traditions? Or are those changes right for children? Is it going to move them on in terms of where they are in transition? Or is it just what's expected, and using more of those conventions of primary school rather than thinking about that young child and what that young child needs and knows and learns? Number 4, we want this to happen for children, but why does it need to happen right now? So that again is all about these conventions of schooling, and we know and we accept that we have parents to consider, and we've got a community to consider where they might be hanging on to some of those traditions and might expect certain things to happen when children come into primary school. But we've got a job to do to make sure that we don't collude with that. We don't just carry on regardless without challenging that attitude, and worse still, to actually practice and live up to some of those stereotypes that we don't want. So, you know, what is the rush? Really, what is the rush? Is it right for children, just by virtue of being in the primary school space, for their experience to be more aligned in primary 1 as it is to primary 7? Or is it more appropriate that their experience is more aligned to what it is in nursery? And of course, people like me would always say it is absolutely the latter. So what is the rush? Could we slow down and could we just be a wee bit more thoughtful about, yes, that will be part of the child's holistic experience in my setting, in my school, but does it need to happen right now? And question 5, just before I do hand over to Laura, just, I suppose very obviously, but have we used all of the means and all of the opportunity really to create that early level identity? Have we offered professional learning together for nursery staff and for primary 1 staff, and where appropriate primary 2 staff? Or are we still separating that out? Is there still that notion of, well, that's what your responsibility is, but actually, you know, when they come into primary 1, really, that's what we're really asking you to do? Or are we really sharing that methodology and really deeply considering the practice together around that? And crucially, I suppose it's the content of that professional learning, isn't it? So, you know, have we focused again too much on the things, on, you know, what things look like and resources, which all are important, of course they are, but actually we need to open up conversations and dialogue about how young children best learn. What is our approach together to make sure that children are making progress? What are the systems and processes that we are going to share? And not to expect that handing over of something when children finish their nursery experience, and then we come in and different conventions happen and different approaches start to take shape that are more aligned then to what happens for older children in school. Okay, so I have rattled through that. That is a huge challenge for me. I hope that's been of some benefit, and those reflective questions will help to, you know, open up some dialogue for you. It is now my pleasure then to hand over to Laura, who will take you through the remaining part of the session. Laura.
Thank you, Lisa. I'm quite reassured about when Lisa said about chaos and noise in the background, because in the room next door to me, it sounds very chaotic. So I hope you'll excuse the background noise, but that's just how it is in a busy school, and it is noisy and it's busy. So I'm going to try and talk to you a wee bit about Carnshaw Primary School and how we've tried to find our way with some of this. And it really, the starting point for us has been that recognition that there's some really excellent practice in our early years. There's really high levels of engagement of our children. And I've often felt as a primary school teacher, and now as a primary head teacher, that we often as primaries look too much towards the secondary sector and try to build in from there. So we're looking into the future when we actually need to look at where the children have come from and the kind of experiences they're getting. So as what we've done in Carnshaw is we started looking at, well, what kind of learners do we want to develop in our school? And you can see for yourself that these are the kind of people that we want to develop, that they're independent, resilient, etc. We've really got to think about what we actually want for our children in the world that we're living in now, because the world that our young people in their early years are living in now is not going to be the world when they're 20. You know, everything's changing so quickly, and our children are going to need to adapt with that. Lisa, if you could move the slide on, please. Thank you. So this is our vision statement, and this is about all learners. You can see there it says school and nursery, and we have really committed to giving all of our children high levels of good quality play-based learning opportunities. That has been a real focus for us for a number of years now, because why on earth would we try to teach children something that they can learn for themselves? They need what we think is really important is that they have this love of learning. And I've always said that learning is not a straight line. Your children don't go from one step to the next step and the next step. It doesn't work like that. We all know as educators that it's messy. sometimes children make very little progress in learning for a year, and sometimes in a year they can accelerate in their learning and run away with themselves. Interestingly, I was on the Scottish Learning Festival. I was listening online to the event at Forth Valley College on Scotland's curriculum, Where We Go Next. I was listening to that last night, and somebody said we have to start when children get that spark, and then they learn really, really fast. And I think that's what we do really well in our nursery in our early years, as we look at where children get that spark, where they get that interest. And sometimes when they move into primary school, we're too busy trying to impart what we know they need to know, and we can actually turn them off learning, and they don't love learning anymore because they don't see themselves as successful. What we've tried to do in Canshore is we're really lucky in our environment. We've got open areas, and they were areas that were used for storage, for working with small groups, and we have said that those are areas for children to play in now. And they are set up very, very like a nursery would be set up. And for us, even a child of primary 7 who's 11 or 12-year-old, shouldn't they be playing all the time? That's what childhood's about. So the next slide. So I'm going to try and talk to you as a leader of a school about how we challenged ourselves as educators to think a wee bit differently about how we were going about things. And what we really did was we started by going back and looking at some of the early building the curriculum documents. We looked at also the engagement of our children, and staff reflected using the Leuven scale. At points in the day, they would stop and look about their classroom and go, are the children engaged in what's going on in here? And they looked at building the curriculum and the different kinds of opportunities for learning. What was happening during the day? Was there spontaneous play? Was there investigating? Were they learning through events and life experiences, or was it focused learning and teaching? And if we move on to the next slide, you can see quite clearly that a large part of the day is spent on focused learning and teaching. That's the part that we're really, really good at often as primary educators. So staff really reflected on the experiences the children were getting over the week, and they recognised that they really, really needed to think about some of these other aspects and the different ways that children can learn. So if we move on to the next slide. So where we started was about finding our way in primary 1, and for me as a leader, I had to get the right people into primary 1, the people that really believed in this as well. And I have not been the person that has done this. This has been my team, and I have got I've got an excellent deputy head teacher and an excellent primary 1 teachers who have really, really embraced this and made it their own. We've had a real play-based learning environments for about 6 years now, and every single year it changes slightly depending on the children. When I first became a head teacher, I was really conscious, as it was my first day as a head teacher, and I probably felt a bit like the children in primary 1, but a lot of them were crying coming in the door in the morning. And as the weeks wore on, more were crying coming into school in the morning. And I remember watching, feeling really upset. I'll be honest, as a new head teacher, there was times I wanted to cry too. But it was really upsetting that these learners starting school were upset coming, because in my mind, the environment was different, the learning was different, and they were finding it really, really hard. So our staff have visited our nursery, and they have learned so much from our colleagues within our early years, and they have been able to share with us how they take children's interests forwards, how they do observations, and the staff in the school have really benefited from that. This has obviously developed as I've moved on through the school, and that part about the staff being empowered and how they take it forward has been really, really important. One of the things for us at the moment, when I think about this, is within our nursery, we've had the children have been getting a lot of opportunities around sewing. And we've got 2 children that have just come into our primary 1 who, while they were in nursery, they were sewing dresses for themselves to wear with proper needles and threads. And it was incredible. And I remember thinking, they're actually saying at 4 years old, I want to be a fashion designer. Now, we all know that just because that's what you say when you're 4 doesn't mean that that's how it's going to be. But what if that is what that wee girl is going to be? She's going to be a fashion designer, and she's already found that love and joy and something that she can develop. And then she comes into primary one and we're not giving her those opportunities. So for me at the moment, that's a really big focus. You know, we know that that child has this love and this joy in learning something. She has a skill and an ability, and we need to develop that and keep that going as she moves through our primary school. So that's a big challenge at the moment. And then on to the next slide. So for me, I'm going to sort of build on some of the things that Lisa said, and how we've managed to find some solutions to the problems of schoolification. And I'm not saying that we've got it perfect, and even listening to Lisa, I'm reflecting again on the things that we could do better. We have to be realistic. The system that is set up for early years is quite different to the system that's set up for schools. The type of staff that we're managing, the terms and conditions of staff, all of that is quite different as you move between these two systems, yet we're within one early level curriculum. So the first thing I've said here as a challenge is the ratio of adult to child. That is a huge challenge for us in primary one and early years within a school, because we have one teacher to 25 children. I've got no allocation of support for learning assistants or anything like that. As the head teacher of this school, I have prioritised some of my resources to that area. But it's still nothing like what it's like in the nursery. And one of our ways of managing that has been to have staff really collaborating. This is not about two primary one classrooms. This is primary one as one big class with these two teachers and a support for learning assistant working as a team, similar to how they would in an early years nursery. So that staff collaboration, in actual fact, the teachers who've maybe been in primary one have now moved on are saying, why do we not all work like this? And we've had times where we've had only one primary one class and we've maybe had a 2 or a 2-3. Those staff collaborate together and work in a really similar way. Another challenge is resources. Our primary schools don't have some of the space, or I can't be space, they don't have the equipment that we maybe do have in our nurseries. So we have managed to really resource ourselves using our PEF, parents fundraising, and another big aspect of resourcing for me as the head teacher is time in the working time agreement. There is time our teachers commit to developing the environment. That is very clear, and it's still a big focus for us now, 6 years on. We can't forget about that. That is really, really important. In terms of space and buildings, our buildings are set up as these individual classrooms. We have had to look at using it differently. When we started this, my deputy said to me, we need to knock down that wall, we need to knock down that wall. And I'm like, we can't afford to knock down the wall. We actually structurally can't, because I think the whole place would fall down. So we had to think really creatively and use the space that we had differently, and not look at it as that's a classroom and that's a classroom. We allow the movement of the children. Things like non-class contact and timetabling are, again, a big challenge. And again, that's where it comes back to that staff team. So particularly in my primary one, I actually allocate PE times and different in bulk to them, and so that the staff can manage that quite creatively themselves, in that they arrange the time so that there's still that free flow. And at the moment, actually, we have got some children who cannot cope with going to something like gym, so they don't. They stay in the environment that they're comfortable with, and that is okay. The other thing is parental expectations. We've worked really hard with our parents. We've met with them, we've explained what we're doing and why we're doing it, and they are on board. At the very beginning, 6 years ago, we held meetings, we took questions, we involved them in every single aspect of our journey so that they were on board. And nobody, no, it's just the way we are now. Nobody really asks or questions anymore. And another big challenge, which you can see I can't really think of much of a solution for at the moment, is the structure of a school day. We have a 15-minute playtime in the morning and a 45-minute lunchtime, and I don't believe that we're getting that right for children. This is an hour that they are in our building, and we are really managing the timings because we don't have the staffing to provide quality. I would love to give children more flexibility in those times to continue playing or working on whatever they're doing, but I have to be able to manage it to provide staff with a break. A big issue for me is lunches. You know, they go from this lovely environment in the nursery where they're eating with cutlery and plates, and it's a real sociable occasion, and they come into a busy school dinner hall where everyone's carrying trays about, and we're trying to get them through as quickly as we can. So these are things that we really don't have right yet. So moving on to the next slide. Within what we've been doing, we are seeing an impact 6 years on. And if you look at this line, you can see that the purple line is our pre-attainment and the green line is our post-attainment. So when I came here, our attainment in our early years and our early levels, so this is looking at things like teacher judgment. I've deliberately left the scale blank because this is not our real numbers, but we have seen an impact in the sense that in primary one, the attainment was always really high, and then it would just drop off as they went through school because they were losing engagement. Whereas now we're not rushing children, we're not pushing them. Attainment's a wee bit lower in the early years, but because they're motivated, engaged, it picks up as they move on through the school. And I'll go to my final slide because I'm getting conscious of time. We just, you know, we've seen children who've got to primary 4 and they're still not on the reading scores, they're not learning to read. But tell you, once they've been ready, they've moved forward 2 years and 7 months, because when they're ready, they will go. I am accountable for the attainment, so it's really, really important that I still prove that what we're doing is making a difference. And I believe that by taking a slower approach in our early years and letting children find their passions and their loves, then we're seeing an impact. Actually, we're getting there. So my final thoughts would be, we just need to do the right thing for our children, what they need right now and when they're in our early years. Learning for me isn't as magical. It doesn't need to be formulaic, which we can often find it is in schools. I think primary school staff can learn an awful lot from their colleagues in early years. For me, we're developing this idea of the environment as a third teacher. So your parents a teacher, your teacher's a teacher, and your environment is the third teacher, because children can learn for themselves. For me, as children are moving through this school, we need to balance, and I'll use the word balance, but I thought about using the word juggle. I thought about using the word dance. What we're trying to do is dance between that stuff that we know as the adults. We need to tell them, we need to teach them to read as a primary teacher, but we also need to balance that with their interests and passions, because if we actually take that pressure off them, they will develop a love of learning that will get them through their whole life and will make a difference to everything that they attain and achieve as they move on. So that's me over and done with, and I'll pass you on to Lisa if she's got any thoughts to add.
Thank you so much, Laura. That was just, you know, I've heard Laura speak so many times, but hearing you again, Laura's just fired me right back up to keep having these conversations. So unfortunately, folks, as we predicted, we are right on time, and we have been asked to keep to time. There are other speakers and other seminars that I'm sure people are booked on and would want to go to. So we are really aware we've not had much of a space to open up to some dialogue, which is a great shame, because that's what we love. We love hearing from you and talking about what we think and what we love. So that is a bit of a shame. But if there is anything that you maybe do want to ask or comment, do please put it into the chat, because that will stay. Laura and I, you know, I hope you can tell, are very, very passionate about this topic. In Falkirk, we have, I think, created a conversation, and I think we've been brave enough to put that out there and to invite challenge and to invite that discourse and that dialogue, and we do want to continue to do that, and we're grateful, really grateful for this opportunity to come along and be part of the Learning Festival to do that. So do get in touch if you want to talk further. We would be delighted to do that, or please do put any reflections or comments into the chat, and we'll do our very best where we can to come back to you if there is anything.